In 2019, the Pokémon trading card game spiraled into its modern Dark Ages. The release of the Tag Team GX Pokémon, which is the game's worst designed mechanic, quickly power-crept evolution Pokémon out of the metagame, leaving a nearly unplayable game of clashing big basic Pokémon by the end of the year. I covered this year of the metagame in my Pokémon TCG's Biggest Mistake video, but today I'll be covering the fallout that followed the tag teams. Pokémon's worst year in the modern era, 2020. 2019 was an awful year of the game, but it was just setting the scene for how bad 2020 would be. 2020 coincided with the release of Sword and Shield, a new generation of the TCG, and this generation would arguably be the worst. This generation immediately introduced two new mechanics to the game, Pokémon V and V Max. Pokémon V were a repeat mechanic of the big basic Pokémon EX from Black and White. They were all basic, regardless of their actual evolution stage, and gave up 2 prize cards. These Pokémon V interestingly decided to keep the full art design of the GX Pokémon, despite not needing it for the purpose of including more text like the GX Pokémon did. Pokémon V were remarkably simple. They only had 2 attributes, and many of the evolving Pokémon V had nearly unusable ones at that. Speaking of evolving, some Pokémon V could evolve into Pokémon V Max, a mechanic that aims to mirror the Dynamax mechanic from the video game. V Max Pokémon evolved from Pokémon V and now gave up 3 prize cards when knocked out. In exchange for that, they further broke the HP record set by the Tag Team Pokémon in 2019. 250 HP from Stage 2 GXs in 2018 became 300 HP with basic tag teams, and now the VMAX Pokémon, effectively Stage 1s, boasted up to 340 HP. The first standard metagame of Sword and Shield was not dominated by these new VMAX Pokémon though. The mediocre strength of the first 5 VMAX Pokémon was nothing compared to the power and consistency of the Tag Team GX Pokémon at the time, and the Pokémon made to counter those tag teams. The biggest cards introduced by Sword and Shield were undoubtedly the powerful trainer cards, such as Professor's Research, Marnie, and Quick Ball, which would reshape decks around them going forward. The early meta was expectingly dominant by previous titans like Mewtwo and Mew GX and Reshiram and Charizard GX, as well as Baby Blacephalon, which was a single prize basic Pokemon that loved KOing big 3 prize tag teams. It was newly buffed with the addition of Cramorant V from Sword and Shield to its strategy. Control decks were also quite strong in this format, with a Rangaroo leading the charge alongside a new Cinccino. A couple of new decks took shape too. The new Obstagoon was a surprisingly good Stage 2 Pokemon, which was a rarity in this format. It was so good since when it attacked with Obstruct, it blocked all damage from basic Pokemon done to it. Since the meta was pretty much all basic Pokemon, this attack basically won the game when it was announced, unless the opponent had a counter card. There's also another deck here. Can you find it? Oh, there it is, ADP Zacian. So anyway, this set debuted what is arguably the most dominant and hated deck in modern Pokemon. Arceus and Dialga and Palkia GX, nicknamed ADP, had the Altered Creation GX attack, which if used when you had a water and metal energy attached to it, would make your attacks do 30 more damage for the rest of the game, and when your attacks took knockouts, you took 1 more prize card. Essentially, this GX attack made it so you could win the game with as few as 2 knockouts, but it also made it very easy to take the advantage away from 1 prize attackers like the previously mentioned Blacephalon, since they would now give up 2 prize cards when knocked out by your attacks. ADP also had the Ultimate Ray attack, which did 150 damage and attached 3 energy from the deck to your Pokemon however you like. Since the attack did 180 damage after an Altered Creation boost, you could KO many support Pokemon like Dedenne GX at the time and take 3 prize cards for doing so. The energy attachments from the Ultimate Ray attack powered up your second attacker in the deck, Zacian V, which could use its Brave Blade attack for 230 damage, or 260 after the boost. It also had the era-defining Intrepid Sword ability, which drew 3 cards that ended your turn, but if you found any metal energy in those 3 cards, they got attached to Zacian. This meant that even if you didn't get a turn 1 Altered Creation attack off, you could settle for an amazing ability that might also just set up your attacker anyway. Zacian V was the most efficient attacker around, able to power itself up with the help of the ability, the Ultimate Ray attack, or the Metal Saucer item, and it made for the perfect partner for Arceus and Dialga and Palkia GX. ADP Zacian was so strong since it could end games incredibly quickly with consecutive attacks for more prize cards. Its only weakness, since the Fairy type got removed, was that it had to rely on Custom Catcher, which was Unreliable Gust. So anyway, Sword and Shield's second set, Rebel Clash, debuted Reliable Gust in Boss's Orders. If you've been enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you'd give the video a like. These videos take a lot of effort to make, so your support means the world. Anyway, back to ADP Zacian and the Sword and Shield metagame. With Rebel Clash released, ADP Zacian now had the ability to end games pretty consistently in 3 swift turns, with the first turn being the use of Altered Creation, before following it up with 2 attacks for 2 knockouts. Rebel Clash also debuted Dragapult VMAX, the first competitively successful Pokémon VMAX card, which used its Max Phantom to spread lots of damage around the opponent's board. While it didn't hit for a lot of damage, Galarian Zigzagoon helped fix its math into taking 2-hit knockouts. We also saw the debut of Boltund V, a new basic lightning card that put Pikachu and Zekrom Tag Team GX decks back at the forefront of the metagame. Boltund V got lightning energy into play to help these decks get a really good early game, and it could swing for lots of damage in the late game. Speed Lightning Energy also gives these decks a built-in draw engine with their special energy. We also saw the takeoff of a new Zacian V deck called Combo Zacian that started seeing play. This deck used Jirachi Prism Star to cheat extra prize cards rather than using the sometimes inefficient ADP. A third Zacian V deck was also seeing play at the time, which paired it with Lucario and Melmetal Tag Team GX called Luke Metal Zacian, or LMZ, for a bulky deck. This was probably the most fair deck of the entire era in retrospect, though its ability to reduce your damage for the entire game with Full Metal Wall GX and then heal off damage was quite infuriating at the time. A new single prize deck, Spiritomb, also popped up, utilizing the new Scoop Up Net card and several 1-energy attackers to easily take out 2 Tag Team GXs per game. In retrospect, this set's meta was probably the most balanced out of the Year 1 Sword and Shield formats, with a wide variety of played decks and play styles. While the skill expression of the game was very low in some decks like ADP Zacian, there was others like Spiritomb and Luke Metal Zacian that rewarded good players. This would all change though with Sword and Shield's third set, Darkness Ablaze, which was about to take the game in a worse direction. Releasing a few powerful cards while rotating out a year's worth of cards, this set drastically changed the metagame. The new Eternatus VMAX was a clear record breaker with the maximum 340 HP and an ability that let it have up to 8 Pokemon in play to let its Dread End attack hit for up to 270 damage. While having a board of only Darkness Pokemon should be a downside, Crobat V was simultaneously printed alongside Eternatus to give this Pokemon the perfect card to throw down and draw. The previous released Galarian Zigzagoon also boosted Eternatus' attack damage to allow it to hit for 1-hit KOs, even on opposing 340 HP VMAX Pokemon. Eternatus' Dark typing also countered the last set's Dragapult VMAX, nearly removing that deck from the metagame for the time being. Crobat V also began to show up in pretty much every other deck alongside Dedenne GX as a consistency booster. Players could now draw up to 12 cards without using their supporter card for turn just by throwing these 2 onto the bench. It became much easier to play poorly and be bailed out for doing so. Another new VMAX Pokemon, Centiskorch VMAX, took advantage of the Welder supporter card, doing more damage for each fire energy attached to it. This deck would become a top threat in the post-rotation Darkness Ablaze metagame. A new Vikavolt V was yet another tool in the Pikachu and Zekrom Lightning Box decks, able to shut down lower HP attackers like Spiritomb with its Paralyzing Bolt item lock attack. Darkness Ablaze also debuted a new Decidueye which paired with the previously released Obstagoon for an improved wall deck. Once again, this deck usually won its games if it got the right Pokemon setup, or lost if the opponent had a way to get past the walls. The post-rotation metagame of Team Up 2 Darkness Ablaze is said by many to be the worst metagame in modern Pokemon. Comprised of the already mentioned Eternatus VMAX and Centiskorch VMAX decks, this metagame also saw the resurgence of ADP Zacian to the top of the meta, partially due to a newly discovered tech Mawile GX, which when played to the bench would check the opponent's hand for basic Pokemon and throw them onto the opponent's bench, not even allowing the opponent to use their abilities. Doing this made it incredibly easy to take away the opponent's draw power by putting down their Dedennes and Crobats, but it also made it nearly impossible to play around ADP Zacian. You didn't have a choice whether your basics hit the board, so ADP Zacian always had targets to take 3 prize knockouts on. Against wall decks like Decidueye, ADP Zacian could also just put down extra basics like Rowlet to ensure they weren't walled off from damaging with their attacks. ADP Zacian decks would later run even 2 Mawile GX to get multiple attempts at the ability, since a single successful use oftentimes meant winning the game on the spot. This led to further success from Luke Metal Zacian since it was one of the only decks that could get away without running liability draw Pokemon like Dedenne GX and Crobat V. It could also use the Full Metal Wall's energy discard effect to put ADP Zacian in a bad spot, exposing the deck's weakness to energy denial. It's really its only weakness, in fact. You either had to overrun ADP Zacian or you had to take away its energy. Turns out discarding energy was one of the only ways to counter Eternatus too, which needed 2 energy to attack and it struggled if one of them was discarded. Discarding energy also slowed down decks like Centiskorch VMAX, which did damage based on the energy attached to it. Turns out there was a solution sitting there the whole time. But the solution is arguably even worse than the problem. Later in the Darkness Ablaze metagame, we'd see the emergence of Crushing Hammer, which became an inclusion in a lot of decks. Crushing Hammer simply states that you flip a coin and if heads, you remove an energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Many games were decided on how well Crushing Hammer flipped. How should you take an overwhelming lead? Well, take a knockout while removing their other energy with Crushing Hammer. How to make a comeback? Well, hit them with Crushing Hammer, and reset Stamp to limit their options. Pikachu and Zekrom became the go-to hammer spammer deck since it was flexible and able to have a disruptive late game. With Vivid Voltage release, the set did not change the meta much. Players had to endure nearly 6 months of the Crushing Hammer Tag Team and VMAX infested meta, arguably the worst meta in modern Pokemon. When a luck-based card defines the game, many players choose not to play at all, especially with a certain lockdown occurring which cancelled all in-person events. Instead, Pokemon saw a flourishing of alternate format play, in retro communities, and in alternate modern formats like the Gym Leader Challenge format. People loved Pokemon, but they did not want to play the standard format in its state at this time. Going into 2021, people began to see some light at the end of the tunnel. The new Battle Style expansion was on the horizon, and Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX showed potential in the game heading in a new direction. While it would still take a while to get to greener pastures, the Battle Style set gave hope to a player base that had almost given up. But 2021 is for another day. If you enjoyed this video, please do be sure to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more retro content uploaded weekly. I also recommend my video on the 2019 Pokemon's tag teams release and how they changed the meta when they released as well. It's kind of like a prequel to this video. If you'd like to see a video on 2021 eventually, let me know in the comments. And thank you all so much for the support in the channel. I will see you in the next one.